village of Umoka was a small, tight-knit community, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. They shared in each other's joys, sorrows, and every rumor that swirled like the dry winds in the dusty marketplace. The villagers spoke in soft voices, their words like cautious whispers of the wind. But there was one topic they spoke of only when they were sure no one else was listening, one person who seemed to carry with her a shadow that no one could explain. Umoka. She was beautiful, with wide, deep brown eyes that seemed to see beyond the present, and her light skin glowing warmly. She wasn't much of a talker, but her presence was always felt. It wasn't just her beauty that caught attention, it was her silence, the quiet mystery that clung to her like the soft mist that rolled in from the river at dawn. But that wasn't what the villagers talked about the most. What they truly whispered about, what they truly didn't understand, was something much stranger. No one knew why she didn't eat fish. It seemed like such a small thing, so insignificant in a village where fish was a daily staple. After all, the river that cut through Umoka was brimming with life, a gift from the gods, the elders said, to sustain them. Fish was in every meal, grilled, smoked, boiled, fried. And yet, in all her years, not once had Umoka touched it. When she was younger, her mother would cook large pots of fish stew for the family, the smell of it wafting through the air, drawing neighbors to their door with hungry eyes. Umoka's siblings would dig in eagerly, their hands tearing the soft flesh from the bones, but she would sit quietly, pushing the stew around her plate, eating only the yam or rice that accompanied it. No one thought much of it at first. After all, children could be picky. But as she grew older, the habit persisted. Her mother, at first, tried to force her. "Umoka, you cannot live in this house and not eat fish," she would say, her voice stern but laced with confusion. "It is our food. It is what the gods have provided." But Umoka would only lower her eyes, saying nothing, her face expressionless. And in the end, her mother gave up, though her worry never left. Over time, the villagers began to notice. At festivals, when the communal pot was filled with fish soup, Umoka would quietly serve herself from the side dishes, avoiding the main course with a grace that was almost unsettling. When asked, she would simply smile, a polite smile, but one that never reached her eyes. It was that smile, the one that seemed to hide something beneath it, that kept people wondering. Because Umoka wasn't rude or strange in any other way. She attended the village meetings, helped her mother in the market, and even sang with the women by the river when they went to wash clothes. She was a part of the village in every way that mattered, but this one thing, this refusal to eat fish, set her apart, created an invisible wall between her and everyone else. As the years passed, the whispers grew louder. "Why doesn't she eat fish?" the women would ask each other as they pounded yam in their courtyards. "Maybe she's allergic," one would suggest. "No, it's not that," another would reply, shaking her head knowingly. "I saw her once, her skin is fine, she doesn't swell. It's something else. Something strange." The conversations were always the same, speculations, guesses, and unanswered questions. But no one ever asked Umoka directly, as if they were afraid of what she might say. There was something about her, something that made them hesitate, something they couldn't quite put into words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village gathered by the river for the annual fishing festival, Umoka stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. Her mother had sent her to help with the preparations, though she knew Umoka wouldn't participate in the meal itself. She never did. The festival was a celebration of the river, of its bounty and its importance to the village. The men and boys cast their nets into the water, pulling in fish by the dozens, while the women prepared the fires for the cooking. The smell of grilling fish filled the air, and laughter echoed across the water as children chased each other along the banks. But Umoka stood apart, her eyes fixed on the river, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't join in the laughter. Instead, she stood there, alone, staring at the water as if it held some secret only she could see. And then, as the first fish were pulled from the nets, something strange happened. The laughter died down, and the air grew heavy, almost oppressive. The water, which had been calm and clear, suddenly darkened, as if a shadow had passed beneath the surface. The men hesitated, their nets hanging limp in their hands, as a chill crept over the crowd. Amoka's eyes widened, just for a moment, before she turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees without a word. No one followed her. The villagers stood in silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed, but they didn't speak of it. Not then. They finished the festival, ate their fish, and went home, though the unease lingered, like a dark cloud hanging over the village. That night, as Amoka lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The river had always been a place of life, of abundance, but tonight, it had felt different. And the way the villagers had looked at her, as if they knew, as if they suspected something. She closed her eyes, trying to push the thoughts away, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, the memories came, creeping into her mind like the mist that rose from the riverbanks in the early hours of the morning. Memories of her childhood, of her mother's voice, of the nights when she would hear the soft, rhythmic sound of the water lapping against the shore, and something else, a sound just beneath the surface, a whisper, faint but persistent, calling her name. She had always ignored it, always pretended it wasn't there. But now, as she lay in the darkness, the whisper seemed louder, more insistent, as if it had been waiting all these years, growing stronger, biding its time. And she knew, deep down, that she couldn't ignore it any longer. That night, Amoka tossed and turned, caught in a restless half-sleep. Her mind was filled with the echoes of the whispering river, the sound of water slipping over rocks and something else beneath it, a voice that tugged at her, pulling her toward memories she had long buried. In her dreams, she was a child again, standing at the edge of the riverbank. It was a memory she had tried to forget, but now it rushed back with vivid clarity. The day had been hot, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the soft buzz of cicadas. Her mother had sent her to the river to fetch water, a task she had done 100 times before. But this time something was different. As she bent down to dip her clay pot into the water, a strange sensation crept over her, a feeling of being washed. She glanced around, but the banks were empty, the trees still, their leaves unmoving in the heat. And yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger with every passing second. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen, her hand hovering over the water. And then she saw it. Just beneath the surface, where the water was darkest, something moved. At first, she thought it was a fish, but as it drew closer, she realized it was far too large for that. It glided through the water with a silent grace, its shape shifting and undulating like a shadow. She watched, transfixed, as it drew nearer and nearer, until it was directly in front of her. That was when the whispering began. It was soft at first, like the murmur of the river, but soon it grew louder, more insistent, filling her mind with words she couldn't understand. She wanted to run, to flee from the thing in the water, but she couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, her body frozen in place as the whispering grew louder and louder. Amoka. It knew her name. The voice that came from the river, from the thing beneath the water, was calling her, beckoning her closer. Her hand trembled as it reached out, almost of its own accord, toward the surface. But then, just as her fingers brushed the water, a shout rang out from the trees behind her. Her mother's voice, sharp and filled with panic. Amoka. Get away from there. The spell was broken. Amoka stumbled back, dropping her pot into the river as she scrambled up the bank, her heart racing in her chest. Her mother rushed toward her, grabbing her by the shoulders and pulling her away from the water. "What were you doing?" her mother demanded, her voice shaking with fear. "Don't you ever go near the river alone again. Do you hear me?" Amoka didn't answer. She couldn't. The whispering was still in her ears, still echoing in her mind. She wanted to tell her mother what she had seen, but the words wouldn't come. And as she looked back at the river, the thing that had been there was gone, leaving only the smooth, rippling surface behind. From that day on, Amoka never went near the river unless she had no choice. And she never, ever ate fish again. As Amoka lay in bed, the memory of that day burned in her mind, as vivid now as it had been all those years ago. The whispering had stopped after that day, but the feeling of something lacking beneath the water had never truly left her. And now, after what had happened at the festival, she knew that whatever had been waiting in the river was still there. Watching. The villagers might not have known why she didn't eat fish, but Amoka did. It wasn't just a dislike or a simple aversion. It was a deep, primal fear. A fear that the fish weren't just fish, that they were connected to something darker, something that had tried to claim her when she was just a child. But it wasn't just fear that kept her away from the river. It was guilt. Because on the day after her encounter at the river, a tragedy struck Amoka. A young boy, barely 8 years old, had gone missing. He had been playing by the riverbank, his friends said, when they heard a strange sound, like a voice, calling from the water. The other children had run away, scared, but the boy hadn't. He had walked toward the water, as if in a trance, and that was the last anyone had seen of him. His body was never found. The elders said it was the river spirits, angry at the villagers for some unknown transgression. They performed cleansing rituals, offered sacrifices, and forbade the children from playing near the river for a long time after that. But Amoka knew better. She knew it wasn't just the spirits of the river. It was something else. Something darker. Something that had tried to take her and had instead claimed the boy in her place. She had never told anyone. Not her mother, not her siblings, not anyone. She had carried the secret with her, buried deep inside, hoping that if she ignored it, it would go away. But it hadn't. And now, all these years later, it was coming back. The dark shadow in the water, the whispering voice, it was returning, and this time, it wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted. The next morning, Amoka awoke with a heavy feeling in her chest. She knew she couldn't avoid the river forever, and after what had happened at the festival, she feared that something worse was coming. The villagers had seen the water darken, had felt the change in the air, and she knew they were starting to suspect that she had something to do with it. She needed to find answers. She needed to know what the thing in the water was and why it had targeted her all those years ago. But more than anything, she needed to find a way to stop it before it claimed another life. With a deep breath, Amoka made up her mind. She would return to the river. But this time, she wouldn't be a frightened child. This time, she would be ready. That was how the story of Amoka, the girl that doesn't eat fish, ended. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please click on the subscribe button. Thank you.